Good evening. Thank you so much for making time to join the event, and thank you so much to CoinStop for hosting. So first of all, with Zetrix, I think those of you who watched the EPL probably has caught our logo a couple of times on the TV screens. And I think before I go into what is Zetrix, let me just explain the. I think there's some confusion also in the room as I talked to some of my old friends from Web2 that I've met again here at Web3, right? So MyEG, which is the company that initiated Zetrix, that is really the relationship, right? MyEG, we've been in the business of e-government services for over 25 years, and we believe that we know how to work with governments and deliver services to end consumers and businesses. But we use that knowledge to kind of look forward and see where we think the technological trends and the user experience is headed. And we believe it's going to be potentially what we call Web3 today, but we also believe like in 5-10 years, no one's really going to call it Web3. It's just going to be what is the present day experience of data and the internet. So blockchain for us is really one of these kind of tectonic shifts in terms of technological innovation, right? For us, we look at it almost simplistically like in the 1960s, you had the advent of the mainframe, right? And then in the 80s, the transition to personal computing. In the 80s, by the way, right, not everybody would have bought a PC, right? It was not a given that people would access it from these devices, either on your labs or on your desktops, that you access the internet. There was a fair chance that you would access the internet in different ways. In fact, the internet as we know today is built upon a layer of TCP/IP, and that protocol will also basically won out the race, right? There was no, the internet as we experience it today, it was not a given. Now come 2000 is how the internet as we know today had evolved into what's more mainstream adoption. I think, we use this term Web 2 in terms of like how you use apps, how you may use like websites like Facebook or X, Twitter. I also sometimes lose track of like how to refer to it, right? X or Twitter. But where we see blockchain is like this next wave of innovation. So every 20 years, we see like a huge monumental shift. And we believe that the shift now is going to be at the data layer, right? Blockchain really for us at the end of the day is no different than just a database structure. So whereas the last preceding 60 years has been kind of like centralized databases, the idea of a decentralized database is not something entirely new. But because of cloud computing and a lot of the things that have happened around the tech sector, it's kind of the time where we see a merger of this happening. Now for us, blockchain is interesting for two main things, right? The two things that are missing from the present day internet on purpose are natively addressed in blockchain. Number one, the concept of identity. So your Gmail address is not really an identity, it's a pseudo identity. Anybody could, if I was fast enough, I would get your name at gmail.com. But that doesn't guarantee that I am you. But the concept of self-sovereign identity is baked into what could be in present day setups of blockchain. And I think that's key, right? So to know who you are or to be able to present who you are when working on an on-chain transaction is key, and I think that's a big shift. Number two is the concept of actual commerce. So present day internet, whether they use PayPal or payment gateways, these are all layers that have been built on top of the present day internet. Whereas in crypto or in blockchain, that's baked into the actual protocol. And so we think that the shift of data from centralized to decentralized, the fact that you can have identity and also payments baked into the network, it's key. So that's where I think you fast forward in our journey, like we started in 2018, looking into the space, we started investing into it, and we were very lucky to be able to have a unique opportunity, right? We obviously didn't, I think you hear this term called Ethereum killer, right? We don't think we're not trying to position ourselves as an Ethereum killer. In fact, we think that Ethereum is doing a pretty good job, and some of the other chains, which may have started off with this concept of like being an Ethereum killer, have kind of shown like, whether it's Solana, Polygon, or even Cardano, they've kind of like built niches in terms of use cases. So we were trying pretty hard to figure out like, how can we add more value to this? And the way that we looked at the problem is really, how do we get to the first 1 billion, what we might call Web3 users? And what does that experience look like? Today, the mainstay crypto or blockchain markets are largely DeFi and maybe self-proclaimed degens, right? I'm also a recovering degen. 2018 wasn't very kind to me, right? But when we looked at it, we said, hey, that can't be the be-all and end-all of blockchain. So we believe that to get past these few hundred million users that we already have to the first billion, you need to make the experience more seamless. Because let's admit it, like the guys who joined blockchain early on are very, very they're very tech savvy. And the logic would then follow that as you get more people on board, on average, they become less and less and less tech savvy, right? It has to be as simple as log in with an email. There probably has to be a reset password function sometime down the line. And so we looked at it and said, well, what's the impetus? The drive will probably not come from DeFi, but what's the game changer, right? And for us, we thought the game changer would be governments and enterprises. So I think there's been a lot of debate in terms of how enterprises have been able to embrace blockchain. And I think it's pretty clear right now that enterprises will not embrace blockchain, kind of like how your Reddit or crypto Twitterverse guy would use it. They use it in a slightly different way. That's enterprises. But what was interesting for us is that there was one country in particular that had actually rolled out a national level blockchain, right? And again, we understand the geopolitical climate, but it's not about any of those. It's really about when you drive this innovation, who's been able to take it furthest, and that was China. So China actually, until today, as far as we know, is still the first country to have a national level blockchain network. There are no cryptos in the sense of traded tokens in there. In China, if you're a Chinese national or Chinese business, you'd apply to the government, they give you an allocation of tokens. There are still tokens on the network, but you use that to basically just pay gas, right? But what was amazing for us is like they took it, they have obviously a very different governance style compared to maybe the West. But in China, when you look, they have the most active network in the world by far. Over 100 million transactions a day, which in comparison to Ethereum's, I think at the highest was about 1 million transactions a day, Bitcoin 250,000 transactions a day. It was enormous. And the difference was the industrial use cases. It wasn't about degens trying to find the next yield farming opportunity or staking opportunity. It was about supply chain management, supply chain financing, right? The movement of goods and the data that go with the goods, and also then the identification, the willing identification of people. And of course, I guess some in the room may argue that in China, sometimes the unwilling identification of people. But when we looked at that, we say, hey, that's novel, right? And that's scalable. So what we did at MIEG was we basically propositioned the Chinese government to understand further the national blockchain. And we were lucky, we had a bit of a lucky guess that as with any country, we would expect that their national blockchain would remain domestic for things not related to blockchain, right? For data privacy laws, for local governance laws, and basically legal stuff. So we propositioned the Chinese government and said, you would need an international gateway to then be able to move data out of China, but also similarly to move data into China, so that when the data passes the border, it complies to certain laws and standards that you may have onshore. And that's really the genesis of what we today call Zetrix. So Zetrix initially we started off positioned as the interoperation or international gateway layer to China. And of course, I think you don't have to think, you don't have to be too creative about it. Like, in fact, the strategy was quite obvious to us. We would go to another country and say, do you want connectivity to China via blockchain? And then we figure out with them what kind of use cases would benefit from this. So naturally, cross-border trade is the first thing, because why? China is the largest trading partner for more than 120 countries around the world, including Malaysia. So in Malaysia, if you don't already know, China's been our largest trading partner for 12 years. This year, they'll be the largest trading partner for a consecutive 13th year. So we go to the government and say, would you like to trade more with China? Would your exporters like to be able to get faster clearance through ports? Would you like the data to be reconciled more automatically compared to what is arguably a lot of incumbent manual processes? So that's when we launched our first kind of, I guess, in-house product called Z-Trade. And Z-Trade in the simplest form means that you send some key trade documents, starting with the certificate of origin, which is a document that you need to kind of get your export through the Chinese ports. Now, in the incumbent process, this can take anything between half a day to 4 days. With our pilots, we've been able to drop the processing time to a matter of minutes. Because why? We save a key process called retro verification. Basically, when the goods enter China, the Chinese customs authority has to verify that the certificate that came from them really came from the country that was declared. And this takes time. With on-chain verification, we changed the game. And what this results in is 50% savings in terms of time at port. And because you spend less time at the port, it converts to about 40% savings in costs. So making money with the blockchain, maybe not natively, but there's an indirect but concerted savings or realization of money saved for the exporters. So of course, this is a pilot we built out between Malaysia to China, and we will also announce that we built it out from Philippines to China. And we start with an export first case because Chinese customs is already on blockchain, and we believe that this will compel the counterparty country to also then consider blockchain for their processes, right? Because they see the immense savings in time and cost. With that, we extend this to like other players on a product called Zetrix, right? And then this was our go-to-market strategy. Because with every trade, you typically have a bank involved. And believe it or not, the banks then have to sift through trust me, huge tons of documents to make sure that you basically have done what you said you were going to do, and then now you can draw down on your financing facility, right? Again, we save time, but more importantly, we validate and verify the information on chain. It saves a lot of time, and hopefully this will lead to a lot of the breaking of the bottlenecks that the banks already face with the document digitalization. So that's what a little bit what we're about. Zetrix, we're a layer one. We really try to focus on government-facing partnerships and enterprise-facing partnerships. But of course, throughout the year, we've been building with some developer partners for consumer-facing developments, right? Because to have an all-encompassing ecosystem where we're all about interoperability to other chains, the majority of chains have consumer-facing applications. So you may have caught this in the news recently that we announced our partnership with the Chinese counterpart to basically go into production for the world's first verifiable credential for driver's licenses, right? Naturally, it was a use case that we're quite familiar with because if you're familiar with MyG, hopefully you've renewed your road tax with us. So we're fairly familiar with the process of a car and the ownership of a car via a driver's license. Now, what this means is that when a Chinese national travels to a country like Malaysia or any country for that matter, when they go to a Hertz car rental or any car rental company, they no longer have to produce this physical driver's license, which again, if you think about it, if you did the incumbent process, how does a car rental company actually know that this is a real driver's license? They actually don't. They take a photocopy, they pray to God that the insurance company will honor it, and they hope that nothing happens to you in the car while you have it, right? So with this, what we do is we have a simple app that they can then download, or even if they don't download the app via a web interface, they scan the QR code, and you can see the on-chain validation by the Chinese authority that this is a legitimate Chinese driver's license. Now, of course, we do this because the Chinese infrastructure is already primed with blockchain, but what we're hoping to do is to replicate this for other credentials, not just driver's licenses, but other means. So this gives rise to a concept called self-sovereign identity, right? I can make a blockchain wallet and say I am who I am, but there are things that I can do in KYC with known validators or issuers that I can really confirm I am who I really say I am. Now, when you take the concept of self-sovereign identity and verifiable credentials, the way I imagine it, and I think honestly the way that we will experience it in like 5 or 10 years is no different than how you have your Apple wallet today. You have one quote-unquote wallet. In the future, you may not even care about the actual wallet address, right? This alphanumeric that nobody ever remembers. But within it, you have stuff that is uniquely yours. Your driver's license, your ID card, maybe a verifiable credential to say that this is the university you graduated from, this is the company you work for. All of this is quite important because we believe that in this version of the future, all of this data is uniquely attributed to you, and always remains within your control. So the version of the future we see is that in the future, you would go with this wallet in your device that only you control, and you go into a bank and you say, I want to open a bank account. And what happens if you go today? They take a photocopy of your IC, right? What happens to that photocopy? If, to be honest, I don't think the bank even knows. If you ask them a year later or 5 years later, they probably have kept it, but they can't even know where they kept it. But it's actually quite alarming if you think about it, right? There's a copy of your identity document with all the details, even a photocopy, that's just stored somewhere. With verifiable credentials and self-sovereign identity, you can then interface with the bank, and basically the way that it works is that you don't have to give them all the data, right? They just need to confirm, is your name really so-and-so? The answer from the blockchain will be to verify yes or no. Are you of a certain legal age, right? So does your computed age exceed 18? A yes or no answer. And even if let's say you use this to apply for a bank loan from a bank, they don't really need to know who your real your employer is and all that, but they would send a challenge, which is that, do you receive consistently salary or monthly deposits exceeding a certain amount every month for the last 6 months? The answer again, yes or no. At all times, the the verifiable credential remains with you, and the on-chain verification can be used by issuers that you allow to have these questions asked. And that's where we see, the future utility of blockchain, right? So again, I'm giving like an example of kind of like use cases of this, but we believe then the creativity, like the sky is the limit, and how people will use this in the future. So that's why we thought very long and hard about an IEO, right? And I'll share a little bit with you why we decided to do an IEO with CoinStore. So number one, we had to be very clear what's our purpose of an IEO, okay? So if you really kind of study the markets in terms of how much people have been able to raise an ICO, IEO, IDO, and really what the funds are used for later. Now, I'm going to just conveniently ignore a lot of the pump and dump and rugs that have happened in the market, right? Those are not good in any market, crypto or no crypto. But for us, it was very clear. What we needed was distribution, because whether we liked it or not, the existing user behavior within the Web3 experience or ecosystem is, I will not go to an issuer, and because that's what we had. We had basically a direct swap function where you could just buy the tokens directly from us. So we tried to emulate a little bit of like how China did it, right? But it just didn't work. People didn't feel that the tokens were legitimate in terms of value because it's directly with the issuer. People expected to buy it from an exchange, which to us was like, why would you want that volatility in price when you just need a token to do certain things? But of course, we couldn't discount the fact that some people were also buying maybe speculatively or maybe as long-term investments. So for us, it was mainly about distribution, and the distribution is important to enable another set of stakeholders that we had, which were independent developers who were consumer-facing. Because for as long as we keep it as a native swap, it may not help the credibility of their dApp because it's not seen as to be entirely fair because it's not from the open market where you procure the tokens. So, and this again, we're sharing our experience. Please don't take this as financial advice. Nothing I say is financial advice. I think typical of any Web3 talk, right, involving crypto. But just to share with you some of our experience, right? I think the naive approach that we learned very quickly about and tried to avoid was you just go for the top one, the top exchange or the top launchpad on a CMC or CoinGecko. Now, this may be unique to us because we obviously have a set of use cases which we cannot avoid the fact that it's geographically targeted, right? If I build Malaysia to China, cross-border trade connectivity, or Philippines to China, some guy in Chile may not see much value in my network. So number one was geographical targeting. Now, I could go to a huge one, and then they could have 0.1% users in Malaysia, 0.3% users in the Philippines, but you're gonna market to the entire venue, and you may not have a very compelling narrative that a large enough crowd would talk about. So that's number one. That's why for us was the most obvious. Why shouldn't we just go for a huge venue? Because there was no guarantee that's going to be huge overlap with the audience that we could already speak to and maybe convey value for. That's number one. Number two, I think you have to be quite careful with the expectations of an IEO fundraise. Yes, it's a fundraise, but I think what we learned was a lot of projects who did it just for the purpose of fundraise and then to use the funds for the development, conveniently or maybe inadvertently ignore the fact that you need to also have market makers in place, because you need to, not to say guarantee, but you need to be responsible to your audience, your investors, that there will be liquidity in place for continuous trading, right? Now, market making is not something that we do, so obviously that's also part of the journey that we had to meet multiple market makers and understand their models and which ones we felt was the most fair to our investors. And the third was obviously reputation with regulators. Because and this may be unique to us, but because we work closely with governments, we also wanted a player, an IEO launchpad that didn't have potentially like a negative connotation or reputation. And arguably maybe that negative reputation is unwarranted, but you can't solve everything, right? So for us, it may not be a risk that we want to introduce within our campaign. So we purposely had to look for players who have not rubbed the law, rubbed the law the wrong way. Let's put it that way, right? I think some of you in the room know that I also have relationships with some other players in the industry, and we would have loved to kind of done stuff with them, but we're just a small, to be honest, in the grand scheme of things, we're just one project, right? And then a lot of other things that have happened in the market we're probably not in a position to kind of negate that entirely and say, hey, let's just ignore all of it. Let's just look at the virtues of what we're trying to build. You kind of have to be realistic and adjust to how our players are perceived in the market. So so those are really kind of the three broad ways that we were looking at it. But I can tell you that the real deal maker in that sense, right, or whatever is the opposite of a deal breaker, was when I met the coin store management. And I think that's quite key. If you ever try to pursue any sort of IEO or exchange-based or exchange-related activity, if you spend enough time on Telegram, you'll see that there's no shortage of guys trying to cold sell you anytime, right? You get enough coverage or enough traction. There's 101 guys that say, hey, I'm from the listings team of this, let's have a chat. So many guys. And trust me, they're all guys, right? They all have pretty girl pictures, but 100% those are all guys behind the Telegram groups, right? So I think it's not that hard to get in touch with a lot of these launchpads or exchanges, but a lot of understanding really how they practice and their policies and the real requirements that you may be faced to have to comply with is really when you meet the management level, right? Then you have a better idea of what kind of projects they're really looking out for, how they would expect you to oblige your investors and not to say guarantee certain things, but at least certain standards that you have to fulfill. Because if you don't do this, a lot of these requirements come after you sign the black and white, right? There's not much you can do. You're just subject to like you must do it or not everything's cancelled, and then you only have anything to whatever you've already spent to lose. So of course, I mean, I appreciate Manfred and the team from CoinStore for making the time to meet us. But to be very open with the audience today, obviously we had similar meetings with a few other IEO launchpad operators, right? This next part, there's no real science to it. You have a gut feel. Honestly, sometimes you sit down with these guys, you kind of have a gut feel, right? Like, and it's not a racial thing, it's not like a national thing, whatever. And I mean, it's a bit easier for me as a Malaysian to speak to Singaporean, that we kind of get onto the same wavelength a little bit easier. But I also met other guys from Singapore and other guys who are operating in other markets which are not so alien to us. And you may not really necessarily have a sense that you can trust them, you know what I mean? Yeah. Or that they will do by you whatever they promise. Which again, I don't want to go into detail about the 8-day experience of the IEO, but I think Manfred will tell you that there were some days that I thought my heart was going to give out, probably cry a little bit in my room because it was probably not growing as fast as we hoped for the IEO. Of course, in hindsight, we were very lucky because the original IEO, a $5 million USDT target raise, we were oversubscribed, so much so that after it closed, enough people complained that they didn't manage to get in on time that we did a 24-hour flash for another million. So we exceeded a 6 million fundraise, but of course, by the terms of the fundraise, we then prorate down. So actually, our total fundraise was only 6, even though it's oversubscribed, right? But so yeah, I mean, I think that's what it is. Like, if you want to pursue an IEO, you have to understand the expectations of the operator. You have to understand the value and the narrative that you're going to deliver, and whether that even gels with the platform. Because as you see, like we IEO'd on CoinStore, but we also did simultaneous or same-day listings on 2 other exchanges. So we went live on Zetrix USDT trading pair, on CoinStore, Maxi, and BitForex, right? And our decision to select Maxi and BitForex again was a combination of that they maybe fit in certain narratives, but they also had some geographical coverage that maybe we thought we could supplement what we had with CoinStore. Now, I think the final thing that I want to share is the reality of our experience of, kind of like whatever can go wrong will go wrong. And this one I really didn't foresee, right? So for the whole, I think like 1.5 years operating, our token has always been called ZTX. Okay? I think the CoinStore team knows this because honestly, this was like the headache that I did not want to deal with, and it happened partway through the IEO, right? The chances of this happening, I don't even know if I didn't even think it was a realistic chance that this would happen. Like the most random name, ZTX. But another project actually listed with the same ticker halfway through our IEO. And I think this is another piece of advice that I think when you work with exchanges, whether an IEO launchpad or an exchange listing, because ironically they listed also on one of our other the venue that we're going to list on, you need to get to know the people, right? Because you don't know what's going to kind of like not work out or like come out of left field. But basically, we had to rename the ticker, you know, and we made a conscious decision not to rename it during the IEO because it will cause more confusion. So we worked out a strategy with CoinStore and we said, look, we'll complete the IEO as ZTX. After the IEO closes, we'll announce to people that there will be a rebranding on the name because of the listing of an unrelated project. And then we'll educate that way, right? But that was the last thing I thought that we would have to do during an IEO, but it still happened. Now, I think we were very happy to be partners with CoinStore and you know, if I had more time, I would love to share further, but the reality is it's not just about a straightforward IEO launchpad and then after that listing. Like we work quite closely with them. For those of you who have been following our journey, you know that we work quite closely with them for CoinFest. We started off in Indonesia, in Bali, CoinFest. We had booths right next to each other. And then we also worked together on Token 2049. And we worked together for a series of things between those two events and also subsequent to that, right? And I think this is all quite important leading up to any successful IEO. And obviously, in hindsight, we can say that it was a successful IEO for us because it's not just about like Telegram groups and dropping a whole bunch of tweets and, you know, working with marketeers to kind of get the number of likes and reactions high on the tweets. I don't think it is. It really is about kind of like going out to the market, explaining your proposition, because if you're not as straightforward as another ERC20 token with a finite, you know, initial mint and a straightforward plan, which we weren't because we were like, you know, trying to target for layer one for a new narrative, you probably have to put in quite significant time. But I think I want to close off this part by saying that, you know, a lot of what we didn't know, we could really rely on the CoinStore team for, you know, maybe you could say it's advice, but because they've been involved with other clients for other IEOs, so to understand the dynamics of what has worked, what hasn't worked. And again, please don't take it at face value, right? Just because something has worked for one issuer may not mean it will work for you. At the same time, something that you are planning to do may not have worked out for other people, but may make a lot of sense for your narrative, for your protocol. Now, maybe just to kind of like leave you guys with some closing remarks. I think, and I get it, like I was catching up with some guys today, like everybody wants to know what we're going to do next, right? Number one, I do not comment on the price action. Our commitment to our investors and the market is that our market makers are there to guarantee liquidity and they are delta neutral, right? So wherever the natural supply demand, basically what we're trying to make sure is that when you want to buy, there's enough to sell. And when you want to sell, there's enough to buy, right? Or there's somebody to buy that. So for us, we're in advanced stages of the B2B kind of cases for the Z-Trade and Z-Trade 5 kind of use case. As I shared with the IEO, we wanted to open up for more opportunity for developers. So a couple of things. Number one, as I said, like I think you can see where it's going with the driver's license as verifiable credentials. There's a lot of SSI plus VC kind of use cases that we're trying to support right now. Please look out, if you're a developer, please check out our social media. We'll be making an announcement in the next couple of weeks about, I don't want to call it a grant program, but it's a more holistic program of how we can support if you're building along these lines. It may not necessarily have to be a grant, may not necessarily have to be funding. It may be some more kind of like foundational stuff in terms of the protocols we're building that we want to work quite closely together with you. So if that's valuable to you, please get in touch with us. Look out for those announcements. The second thing is, we'll be announcing in the next, in due course, we understand the kind of like the importance of brand, right? So we have a few corporate partners who are fairly big brands in the markets that we're looking at, in ASEAN, in the RCEP countries, in the East, I guess you can call it, right? The East, including New Zealand and Australia. So we'll be announcing some Web3 initiatives with them, which are running on Zetrix. And although they will be kind of like pilots, they will be consumer-facing pilots. So there will be an opportunity for you to also get involved. And if you don't already know, we're fairly cheap at Zetrix. Cheap in the sense that like the gas fees are very cheap, okay? So participating in some of these pilots will probably cost you like nominal amounts, right? I believe like token transfer in Zetrix right now is still less than 2 cents US. And even smart contract execution is, I believe we ran one a couple of days ago, it was like 30 cents US. So we're quite proud at this level right now, the network's still quite cheap. And our consensus protocol incorporates what's called a deterministic gas model. So the gas price doesn't inflate as the network becomes busier, right? So it's deterministic. It just depends on the size of the data that you execute. Whether obviously smart contract is larger data than a token transfer between two wallets, right? But that's one of the things that we kind of learned from the Ethereum experience, that we knew that there was a technical way to not introduce that risk long term. So yeah, maybe this time next year you would have collected a bunch of your airline tickets and boarding passes, and maybe use some of your identity, right, as an NFT on Zetrix. So I think if we reach there, then I think we'll be quite proud. I wouldn't say that we've achieved everything we want to achieve, but I think to realize that this B2C kind of use case, we probably made significant strides in that. So yeah, look out for those announcements. And if I can do a selfish plug, I actually don't know what the price is right now. Like I'm too nervous to look at the price on CoinStore or any of the trading venues. But we're available for trading on CoinStore, Maxi, and BitForex. And as I said, I think we're looking for partners. If you're a developer or you want to get involved in the ecosystem, let's have a chat. We want to build interesting use cases on the back of some foundational tools that we think is going to be there long term for the blockchain industry. So yeah, once again, thank you very much, and thank you again to CoinStore.
Open the floor to question. Oh, okay. Hey guys, I'm going to open the floor for some questions for Zetrix and for Dato. If you guys got any questions, feel free to shout.
Hi Dato, I'm Jason from BitcoinMalaysia.com. First and foremost, congratulations on your IEO, right? My question to you is, can you share with us, like, what is one thing, what does success look like for Zetrix next year, 2024? One thing.
So apart from maybe your plane tickets and stuff as an NFT, right? Maybe apart from that. So success for us really is for next year. I think what's core is supply chain financing using blockchain information, right? It's a huge project for us. If you followed some of our announcements, we partnered with the Bank of China to basically extend financing as long as you use blockchain for the data submission to non-Chinese, or as in non-mainland Chinese companies. So you could be a Malaysian company, Singaporean, Filipino company. That's a program that you go through with Bank of China, and basically you can then export to China, and Bank of China from China itself will provide you the financing, which is unique because we're able to do this because of the blockchain-based data commit and verification, right? So this kind of like cross-border financing has never been possible before, and I think that's a huge leap for that industry. If any of you are in banking, or specifically transaction banking, right, or trade financing, you'll know that the hardest part is the assessment of the applicant. The company that says he's going to ship to somebody in China, a lot of this verification of what they submit is done practically like manually, So we're trying to change that, and I think if we can achieve that within a year, and you have to be realistic with B2B pilots, they're not 2-week or 2-month pilots, right? They take quite a while. But if we're able to achieve that, which we're confident we will be able to materialize that within the year, I think that's a big game changer that hopefully lots of other players will emulate.
Thank you, Dato. Any other questions from the ground? No? You have?
I had a quick question. One of the challenges that I've seen on a listing is just the beginning. The challenge both from a cost point of view and also investor management point of view is to keep that interest going. So what's been your experience doing that, across all the places you're listed on?
So for us, really, there's two parts of this, right? One part that we're fairly well experienced with, and we have quite a lot of trust in that mechanism. Another one where, admittedly, is relatively newer to us, right? So maybe I start with the more crypto native or Web3 native one, which is that a lot of announcements and engagements on stuff like crypto Twitter, right? So I think today we have like a great team like Ines and all that who are helping us manage the communities and also help us communicate out, which we're trying to do a better and better job as we go through. But we also rely on a lot of like mainstream media press newswire announcements. I think that fits for us as a project because we work B2G, B2B, and this is probably where the businesses and the government stakeholders are going to read it. They're probably not going to read it on a Twitter thread. I don't think a lot of our government or business partners follow us on Twitter, right? I think that's more of a consumer-facing channel for us. So yeah, you probably can't do a listing or an IO and a listing and then just say, let's pray to God that it all works out. You have to continually keep your community informed, and I think then you have to adjust that for the nature of your project. So with us, we have a few set of stakeholders. The consumers, obviously, we try to manage with social media channels and Telegram communities. Please join our Telegram community if you want to get involved. But I think we also have another set of stakeholders where that has to run through press news wires, printed media, your online or also printed newspapers, right? And media channels like that. So so far it's worked out quite well. Then again, whenever I hear from our enterprise partners, I'm 100% sure they've read it through one of the news sites and not really through something we've announced on Twitter. So I think for us, that's a strategy that has worked so far.